Hi, today we're going to discuss about the urinary system. So let's start with the functions. As you can see, here are the functions of the organs that belong to the system. The first one is that the kidneys regulate blood volume and composition, helps regulate blood pressure, synthesize glucose, release erythropoietin, which is a hormone secreted by the kidneys that increases the rate of production of red blood cells, participate in vitamin D synthesis, and excrete wastes by forming urine. Another function is that the ureters transport urine from the kidneys to the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder stores urine, and the urethra discharges urine from the body. So let's proceed with the anatomy of the kidneys. The kidneys are said to be reddish and bean-shaped. They are located above the waist, between the peritoneum and the posterior wall of the abdomen. Because their position is posterior to the peritoneum of the abdominal cavity, they are said to be retroperitoneal. They are partially protected by the 11th and 12th pairs of ribs, and right kidney is said to be a bit lower than the left since the liver occupies a big space. A typical adult kidney is 10 to 12 cm or 5 to inches long. It is also 5 to 7 cm or 2 to 3 inches wide and 3 cm or 1 inch thick, about the size of a bar of a bath soap, and has a mass of 135 to 150 grams. Here is a more detailed view of the kidney through sagittal section. When we say sagittal, it divides the body into right and left parts. Now let's focus here. There are 3 layers of tissue that surrounds each kidney. So we first have the renal capsule, which is the deepest among the 3 and continuous with the outer coat of the ureter and helps maintain the shape of the kidney. Adipose capsule surrounds the renal capsule. From the word adipose, it contains or it is composed of fat tissue. Renal fascia. It anchors to the abdominal wall and also the outermost layer. So that is it for the external anatomy of the kidney. How about the internal? So here is an illustration of the internal anatomy of the kidney through a frontal view. Frontal view divides the body anteriorly and posteriorly or front and back. There are 2 distinct regions of the internal kidney, the light red area, which is the renal cortex, and the renal medulla, which is the reddish-brown inner region. The renal medulla consists of several cone-shaped renal pyramids. The base of the wider or humerus malapad faces the renal cortex, while the apex or humerus manibus or narrow portion called the renal papilla faces the renal hilum. Minor calyx receives urine from the papillary ducts of one renal papilla and delivers it to a major calyx. From the major calyces, urine drains into a single large cavity, which we call the renal pelvis, and then out to the ureter and to the urinary bladder. Renal cortex is divided into an outer cortical zone and an inner juxtamedullary zone. Portions of the cortex that extends towards the renal pyramids are called renal columns. Together, the renal cortex and the renal pyramids of the renal medulla constitute the renal parenchyma, or it is the functional portion of the kidney. Within the parenchyma are the functional units of the kidney, which we call the nephrons. So these nephrons create urine, which drains into the large papillary ducts. Papillary ducts drain into cup-like structures, which we call minor and major calyces. Each kidney has about 8 to 18 minor calyces and 2 or 3 major calyces. Lastly, the renal hilum expands into a cavity within the kidney called the renal sinus, which contains parts of the renal pelvis, the calyces, the branches of the renal blood vessels, and nerves. The functional unit of the kidney are the nephrons. There are 2 parts, the renal corpuscle and the renal tubule. Renal corpuscle is where blood plasma is filtered, while the renal tubule is where the filtered fluid passes. The renal corpuscle has two components, which are the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule. Blood plasma is filtered in the glomerular capsule, and then the filtered fluid passes into the renal tubule, which contains three main sections. So we have the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. In order to produce urine, nephrons and collecting ducts perform three basic processes. So we have the glomerular filtration, the tubular reabsorption, and the tubular secretion. Upon the production of urine, the first step is glomerular filtration, in which water and most solutes in blood plasma move across the wall of glomerular capillaries into the glomerular capsule, and then into the renal tubule. In tubular reabsorption, filtered fluid flows along the renal tubule and through the collecting duct. Tubule cells reabsorb about 99% of the filtered water and many useful solutes. The water and solutes return to the blood as it flows through the peritubular capillaries. From the word reabsorption, it means the return of substances to the bloodstream. In tubular secretion, fluid flows along the renal tubule and through the collecting duct. The tubule and the duct cells secrete other materials such as wastes, drugs, and excess ions into fluid. From the word secretion, it removes a substance from the blood. So here is an illustration of the three processes to produce urine. So you may pause the video to take a good look at the diagram. Urine transportation, storage, and elimination. Ureters transports urine from the renal pelvis of one kidney to the urinary bladder. Ureters are 25 to 30 cm long or 10 to 12 inches long. Like the kidneys, the ureters are retroperitoneal. Three layers of tissue form the wall of the ureters. The deepest coat, which is called the mucosa, the middle or the intermediate, which is called the muscularis, and the superficial coat of the ureter, which is called the adventitia. The next is the urinary bladder. It is a hollow distensible muscular organ situated in the pelvic cavity posterior to the pubic symphysis. For males, it is situated anterior to the rectum. In females, it is anterior to the vagina and inferior to the uterus. Urinary bladder capacity averages 700 to 800 ml. It is smaller in females because the uterus occupies the space just superior to the urinary bladder. The discharge of urine from the urinary bladder is called micturition, also known as urination or voiding. Micturition occurs by a combination of involuntary and voluntary muscle contractions. When the volume of urine in the urinary bladder exceeds 200 to 400 ml, pressure within the bladder increases considerably, and stretch receptors in its walls transmit nerve impulses into the spinal cord. These impulses propagate to the micturition center in sacral spinal cord segments S2 and S3 and trigger a spinal reflex called the micturition reflex. These impulses causes the relaxation of the internal urethral sphincter muscle. Upon contraction of the urinary bladder wall and relaxation of these sphincters, urination takes place. So let's proceed to another structure, which is the urethra. It is an internal urethral orifice in the floor of the urinary bladder to the exterior of the body. For females, its size is 4 cm or 1.5 inch, and for males, it's 20 centimeters or 8 inches. Both for male and female, this is a terminal portion of the urinary system. For men, it discharges both semen and urine. A question before we end. Why is UTI more common in female than male? It is simply because bacteria can reach the bladder more easily in women. The urethra is shorter in women than in men, so bacteria have a shorter distance to travel. So that's the end of today's lesson. I hope you learned something new.